Christmas was supposed to be about family, but when my daughter-in-law handed me the invitation, it said, Mr. Vaughn, like I was just some guest in my own house. Later, she told me in front of everyone, "Don't worry, Dad, just stay out of the way. We'll handle everything." My son just stood there in silence. I smiled, but inside I knew the truth. They were already making plans to sell my home. What they didn't know was that I had proof in my hands, and a plan of my own. So when the big day came, instead of waiting for a seat at their table, I packed my suitcase and walked out with a ticket to Las Vegas. Do you want to know how they reacted when they realized I wasn't coming? Stay with me until the end, and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the rest of my story. The late December chill had settled over Asheville, the kind of cold that crept into the bones no matter how high the thermostat was set. The living room felt quieter than usual, sunlight slanting through the blinds in thin stripes across the rug. On the coffee table sat a single white envelope, thick paper with a glossy sheen, standing out against the worn wood as though it didn't belong. It had arrived earlier that afternoon, slipped into the mailbox with the rest of the usual clutter, utility bills, coupons, a catalog or two. Yet unlike those, this envelope had a kind of weight to it. My name, typed neatly on the front, stopped me for a moment. Not Dad, not Grandpa, not even Lester, just Mr. Vaughn. The letters looked stiff, like they had been pulled from a template. I sat down slowly, glasses sliding down my nose as I tugged the flap open. The paper inside was thick, embossed with snowflakes and gold trim. Christmas gathering, it read, in swirly font, too polished for something meant to be warm. Below it were the details: date, time, address, my house, the one I'd lived in for nearly 4 decades, the place I built memories with my late wife, the walls that had held birthdays, Thanksgivings, even weddings. Yet the invitation carried no sense of belonging for me. No, we'd love to celebrate together. No, your presence means the world. Just formality. As if I were a stranger who needed directions to a hotel banquet. A dull sting spread through my chest as I read it again. Outsider. That was how it felt. The chair creaked as I leaned back, letting the card rest against my knees. The silence of the room made every thought louder. My house was being readied for Christmas, yet here I was, feeling like I had to RSVP to my own living room. I thought of Daryl, my son, who hadn't said much about it. He used to call, ask if I needed anything, share pieces of his day. Lately, though, his words had been few, often just practical questions about the yard or bills. The planning, that wasn't his doing, it was Marla's. Always Marla. She had a way of taking charge, speaking in that tone that didn't invite questions. I tried not to resent it, tried to remind myself she was just trying to hold family together in her way. But the way this card looked in my hand, stiff and impersonal, told a different story. I set it down and rubbed my temples. For the first time, I wondered if Christmas here was less about family and more about control. The next day, Marla stopped by, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor as though announcing authority with every step. She didn't stay long. She never lingered with me. She had lists in her hand, numbers she rattled off to herself, all the names of people she was bringing. "Don't worry, Dad," she said casually, barely looking up. "Just stay out of the way. We'll handle everything." The words landed sharper than she could have guessed. Stay out of the way. Not be comfortable. Not help us. Not even enjoy. No. I was furniture to be moved aside. I didn't argue. Arguing never won me anything with her. Instead, I kept quiet, eyes drifting to the corner of the paper where a familiar name caught me. Randy Ketchum, one of her relatives. A man who once laughed a little too hard at my expense during a summer barbecue. He would be among the 25 Marla had invited into my home. Silence pressed around me after she left. The furnace hummed in the background, a steady noise that couldn't cover the hollowness spreading through my chest. That night, I sat alone with the card again, fingers trembling slightly. I traced the snowflake trim as though the paper might yield answers. Daryl's silence echoed louder in my mind than Marla's words. His lack of protest was its own kind of agreement. A shift stirred within. I wouldn't challenge them now. That would be useless. Instead, I would observe, wait, and keep my thoughts close. Quiet resolve grew stronger with each breath, an anchor against the storm that seemed to be building. The invitation slid back into its envelope, but it might as well have branded itself across my chest. The words, cold and formal, pressed heavy inside me. Something told me this Christmas would not be mine at all. The house didn't feel like mine that morning. The smell of pine needles and cinnamon candles lingered in the air, but it wasn't me who had lit them. From the living room, laughter and chatter spilled down the hallway, the kind of voices that belonged to people who had never lived here, who never paid a dime for the roof over their heads. I paused before walking in, hand resting on the doorframe, listening. When I stepped inside, the sight stopped me. My daughter-in-law, Marla, was directing her cousins and aunts like an orchestra conductor. Boxes of ornaments were scattered across the carpet, strands of lights tangled on the sofa, garlands stretched across the mantel, yet no one turned when I entered. My boots against the hardwood may as well have been silent. I tried to smile, tried to pretend this was still my family gathering, not some event I was merely allowed to witness. "Need any help with the tree?" I asked, forcing my voice into the room. Marla didn't even look at me. She waved a hand dismissively, eyes on the wreath in her cousin's hands. "We've got it covered, Dad. Just relax." Relax. In my own house. I lowered myself onto the edge of a chair, watching as they draped tinsel where I would have never put it. This was the living room where Daryl had once opened his Christmas toys, where my late wife had set out stockings by the fire. And now, it looked like a rental hall being dressed for a stranger's wedding. The unease tightened in my chest. Later, when I picked up a single glass ornament, a little red ball that had been in the family for decades, I thought maybe I could contribute. I reached for a branch near the center of the tree, a spot that had always been mine to decorate. "Not there," Marla's cousin snapped. She didn't even use my name, just a curt correction, like to a child. Heat rose in my ears. I shifted the ornament to another branch, but the moment had already been stolen. The laughter around me didn't falter, not even enough to notice the sting on my face. The younger ones giggled and swapped stories about people I barely knew, ignoring the man who had kept this roof over their heads. My hand tightened around the ornament until I feared it might shatter in my palm. Finally, I set it back in the box and slipped away. From the doorway, I watched Marla's control unfold like a show. She assigned chairs, moved my furniture without asking, dictated the menu as if she were the homeowner. My son, Daryl, leaned against the wall, eyes down, hands in his pockets, not a word, not a defense. That was when it struck hardest, standing in my own kitchen, the heart of this house, and realizing I was invisible. My chair was no longer mine, the stove no longer mine, not even the counter where I had once left Sunday morning pancakes for my family. Marla's voice filled every corner until my presence disappeared. I retreated into the den. The soft creak of the recliner under my weight reminded me it was still mine, at least for now. From the shadows I could see them bustling, their words blurring into a single hum. It was there, sitting alone, that the truth settled in. This wasn't just about a holiday. This was about control of the house, of the family, of me. My silence stretched like a shield. They thought I was harmless, that I would fade into the background. But inside, a different note began to play. A quiet resolve that told me to watch, to wait, to plan. The hum of their voices grew faint as I stared at the floor, replaying every word, every glance. My heart carried both humiliation and a sharp, growing clarity. I sat in my own chair, uninvited, and for the first time I wondered if they had already written me out of my own family's story. The kitchen was quiet when I walked in that morning, the kind of silence that feels unnatural in a house being readied for Christmas. On the counter sat a sheet of paper, neatly typed, with names lined up in 2 columns. My eyes traveled down the list, 25 names in total. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, in-laws of in-laws. Even a neighbor of Marla's appeared on the sheet. But as I moved down the lines again, slower this time, the truth hit me. My own name was missing, the house where the party would take place, the chair I had built by hand in the dining room, the kitchen I had remodeled after long hours at the plant. All of it was mine, and yet, in black and white, I was absent. That wasn't an oversight. That was deliberate. The shock sat heavy in my chest. A small part of me wanted to believe it was just a mistake, a slip of the keyboard. But the longer I stared, the clearer it became. Marla had made sure I was nowhere on that page. A creeping heat spread under my skin. This wasn't just about seating or head counts. This was about being written out of my own family's story. I set the paper back down carefully, as if it were fragile glass, though inside I felt anything but careful. My breath came harder, uneven. Betrayal had a weight, and that list carried it. Walking down the hall, I caught sight of the family photo that had hung there for years. It was taken a decade ago, Christmas morning, all of us around the tree. I remembered standing in the back, hands resting on Daryl's shoulders, feeling proud. But when I leaned in closer now, my stomach dropped. The photo had been changed. My face was gone, literally gone. In its place was a newer picture, trimmed and taped over, showing Marla and Daryl with Shanda squeezed between them. I stared, throat tightening, at the empty space where I should have been. Cutting me out of a picture wasn't an accident. Someone had gone through the trouble of removing me, of filling the space so it looked as though I'd never been there at all. The humiliation burned deeper than words. This was more than control of a holiday. It was erasing me from memory, from history. The laughter from the living room carried down the hall then. Marla's high-pitched cackle mixed with voices I didn't recognize. It was as if the house itself was siding with them, carrying their joy into the quiet corner where I stood frozen. My hand brushed the frame, but I pulled it back quickly. Touching it felt dangerous, like proof I still believed I belonged there. I retreated into my den, the one room that still felt like mine. The walls held shelves of books. The desk bore scratches from years of bills and letters. The old armchair sagged in the middle just right. I sat heavily. Silence pressing in from all sides. Memories flooded. Late nights working overtime so Daryl could go to college. The mortgage payments I kept up even when times were tight. The roof repairs after the last storm. Every nail, every dollar, every sacrifice seemed to echo in the room. And now, here I was, removed from a guest list, sliced out of a photograph, reduced to a shadow in my own house. I leaned back, closing my eyes for a moment, letting the sting sink in. A man doesn't cry easily at 75, but there's a different kind of breaking that comes with betrayal, a quiet, jagged hurt. From the den I could hear Marla again, laughing like she owned the place. Each sound drove the wound deeper, anger simmered, but I didn't let it spill, not yet. Instead, a colder thought took root. This wasn't random. None of it. The missing name. The altered photo. These were steps in a plan to erase me, to take not just the house but the space I held within this family. I sat there, breathing slow, hands resting on the worn arms of the chair. Silence had become my armor, and I wore it well. No confrontation tonight. No raised voice that could be turned against me later. Let them think I was old and quiet. Let them think I wouldn't notice, but I noticed everything, and I would keep noticing. If they could strike my name off a list and cut me from a picture, what would they erase next? The first signs came quietly, almost too quiet to notice. Strange cars began appearing along the curb, engines cooling while unfamiliar voices drifted past my window. The whispers on the phone grew sharper, quicker. Whenever Marla stepped into the hallway with her cell pressed tightly to her ear, I caught her once with a stack of papers, glossy edges poking from the manila folder, but she tucked it under her arm and changed the subject before I could see more. A man learns, at my age, to pay attention to the little things. Those little things had begun to add up, and they painted a picture I couldn't ignore. By evening, the house smelled of roasted meat and cinnamon candles. Marla's doing, not mine. She bustled through the kitchen like a queen bee, giving orders about the placement of the platters and who would sit where. Daryl stood nearby, quiet, arms crossed, neither challenging her nor offering me the smallest glance of solidarity. The table was extended with leaves I hadn't seen used in years, polished and set for a crowd. When Randy Ketchum swaggered in with a laugh that filled the dining room, he clapped me on the shoulder and muttered, "Lucky old man, still get to live here, huh?" The words slid out with the sting of a backhand. I forced a thin smile, though inside something tightened. Dinner began with clinking glasses and loud chatter. The noise swirled around me, but my mind drifted to the desk in the corner, to the family iPad that Marla had left open earlier that day. Curiosity had tugged at me like a loose thread, and I had pulled. What I found nearly stopped my breath: an email chain. Subject line bold and unmistakable. Property listing inquiry. The name at the bottom, Eileen Carmack. Realtor. My house. My home. Not an oversight. Not an idea being floated. Plans. Plans I hadn't been told about. The betrayal took shape in cold, sharp lines, while they ate and laughed. I chewed slowly, each bite bitterer than the last. I sat through the courses, my face a mask of neutrality. Years of weathering storms taught me how to keep still when the wind howled. Across the table, I noticed Shanda, my granddaughter, her young eyes fixed on me in a way the others never looked. Concern flickered there, while plates shifted and Marla bragged about seating charts. Shanda leaned over, her hand brushing mine. Something small slipped into my palm, folded tightly. A note. She didn't meet my eyes after, but her message was already louder than any of the voices at that table. For the first time that evening, a flicker of hope warmed my chest. Later, when the house quieted and the guests carried their laughter out the door, I sat alone in the den with the folded scrap of paper. My fingers trembled as I opened it. The handwriting was hurried, sharp with urgency. "Grandma's room is being shown to strangers when you're out. They're planning something." The words cut deeper than Randy's crude joke, deeper than Marla's dismissive orders. Strangers, walking through the rooms that still held my wife's scent, her pictures, her memory. My jaw clenched, and for the first time, I no longer questioned whether I was imagining it. The betrayal was real, deliberate, and already in motion. I folded the note again, pressing the creases flat. The house was dark now, silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Looking around, every shadow seemed to whisper secrets I wasn't supposed to hear. I leaned back in my chair and let the anger settle, not in bursts, but in a steady, controlled fire. They thought me weak, thought me blind, thought I wouldn't notice. They were wrong, very wrong. "They think I don't know," I whispered to the empty room, my voice steady as stone. "But I do." Marla stood in my kitchen that morning, pulling open cabinets as though they belonged to her. Pots and pans clattered on the counter. My old cast-iron skillet set aside like some relic from another age. She stacked holiday dishes in neat piles, muttering about how my things didn't match the decor. Watching her handle my belongings as if they were clutter stung more than I cared to admit. "Marla," I said, my voice low but edged. "Those are mine. They've been in this kitchen for decades." She didn't even look at me, just shrugged, sliding another bowl into a different shelf. "We're trying to make the place look presentable, Dad. No one wants to eat Christmas dinner off cracked plates." That word again. We. Never you. Never your home. Just we. As if I were already written out of the story. Irritation pushed hard in my chest, and I took a step closer. "You don't get to decide what belongs in my kitchen," I told her. Finally, her eyes lifted, full of challenge. "Oh, come on. Nobody cares about your old ways. Things change, Lester. It's better if you just sit back and let us handle it." The words sliced sharper than the knife she held. Relatives sitting in the living room turned their heads at the sound of our voices. My jaw tightened. For days I had swallowed the small slights, the whispered plans, the erased name on the guest list, but something in me cracked right there among the clatter of dishes and the smell of cinnamon candles. "Handle it?" I raised my voice, startling even myself. This is my house, Marla, not yours, not a banquet hall for your relatives. Mine. Her laugh rang out, high and dismissive. Your house. Please, look at you, sitting in the corner like some museum piece. We've been running this place for years. Honestly, you should be grateful we're still letting you live here. A ripple of chuckles rose from Randy Ketchum and a few others lounging nearby. My face burned hot. It wasn't just her words, it was their amusement. The way they leaned back in their chairs as if I were some tired joke for their holiday entertainment. I slammed my hand on the counter, the sound silencing even the laughter. I built this home, every nail, every wall, paid for with my blood and sweat, and you dare stand in here and call me irrelevant? For a moment, the air froze. My eyes shifted to Daryl, my son. He stood near the doorway, shoulders hunched, watching it all unfold. My chest ached as I waited for him to speak, for him to stand up and say, "That's enough, Marla. This is Dad's house." But nothing came. His lips pressed tight, eyes sliding down to the floorboards, silence stretched, heavier than the words Marla had thrown. "Daryl?" I called his name, voice cracking with a mixture of desperation and anger. He didn't answer. He didn't move. My own son, once a boy who clung to my hand at church, who begged me to pitch baseballs in the yard until the sun went down, couldn't lift his head to defend me. That silence, that betrayal, broke something deep inside. Marla smirked, sensing her victory. "See? Even Daryl knows it's time to move on. Maybe you should try it." A hollow quiet filled the kitchen. I steadied myself, forcing the tremor out of my hands, and spoke slowly so every word would settle in the air. "You may laugh. You may shuffle my things. You may think my silence means surrender. But let me make one thing clear." I straightened my back, looking not just at Marla, but at every relative who lingered, pretending to busy themselves with decorations. "This is still my home, and there are lines you will not cross. Not while I'm alive." No one laughed this time. Even Marla's smile faltered, though she masked it quickly. The room thickened with tension, silence pressing hard against the walls. But when my gaze drifted back to Daryl, he still wouldn't meet my eyes. His silence thundered louder than any insult. The silence in that room was deafening. But in Daryl's silence, I heard the loudest betrayal of all. The house had quieted after the storm. Plates had been cleared. Relatives drifted into side conversations, and the echoes of raised voices seemed to hang like smoke in the air. Sitting in my den, I could still feel the sting of Marla's words and the way Daryl's silence cut deeper than any insult. My own son, standing there with his head bowed while laughter bubbled from Randy's mouth, had let me drown without reaching for a hand. The silence pressing in around me was heavier than the chaos had been. The old armchair in the den creaked when I settled back, a familiar weight under me. For years, this had been my sanctuary, the place I came to balance checkbooks, write holiday cards, or read the morning paper. Tonight, it felt like a bunker. Outside the door, voices carried faintly, Marla issuing instructions, the younger ones laughing at jokes that no longer included me. My jaw clenched. I thought of all the Christmases I had hosted, all the sacrifices stacked like cords of wood, and I realized something. The scales had tipped. My home was no longer mine, at least not in their eyes. I opened the laptop on the desk, telling myself I would focus on something routine, paying the utility bills, maybe checking a bank statement. The familiar login screen blinked, and with a couple of clicks I was in. That was when I noticed it. The inbox had already been open. Not under my name, but under Daryl's. For a second, I hesitated. It felt like trespassing, but then I thought of the sneers, the way they brushed me aside in my own kitchen. My finger hovered, then clicked. There it was. An email chain that made my chest tighten and my breath turn shallow. The subject line read, "Vaughn Property Inquiry." The sender was a name I recognized only faintly, Eileen Carmack, Realtor. My heart sank as I scrolled. The messages were casual, even cheerful. Marla and Eileen discussing potential buyers, showing dates, and the best way to stage the house when Lester is out. Every word landed like a blow. This wasn't a misunderstanding or an accident. They had been planning to sell my house, the roof I built for my family, right under my nose. I scrolled back up, staring at the dates. Weeks. They had been at this for weeks, and I had never noticed. Shaking, I opened another folder, curiosity burning even as dread gnawed at me. Draft documents. My name sat at the bottom of a sales agreement, but the signature wasn't mine. It mimicked the way I signed checks. But the slant was wrong, the flourish unnatural. For a long moment, I just stared. It was like looking at my own ghost. The horror of it turned quickly to rage. This wasn't just betrayal. This was theft, calculated and cruel. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. Years of hard work, every nail hammered, every bill paid on time, every repair made with my own hands. And here it was, reduced to a line item on a realtor's spreadsheet. I pressed my palm against the desk, forcing myself to steady. Panic would do me no good. If they wanted a war, then war they would get. But it would be fought on my terms. I hit print, and the whir of the old machine filled the room as the evidence rolled out. Emails, contracts, all of it. I stacked the papers carefully, slid them into a folder, and walked them to a drawer I kept locked. The key turned with a satisfying click. For the first time in days, the weight in my chest shifted. Not gone, but transformed. I had something solid now. Not just suspicions or stinging remarks. They thought I was too old, too distracted, too frail to notice. They thought they could erase me with laughter and silence. But I had proof. Standing there in the darkened den, I whispered to myself. They thought I was too old to notice, too weak to resist. But I had the proof in my hands now. The war for my home had just begun. The morning of Christmas Eve carried a stillness that didn't feel like peace. It was the kind of silence that hides whispers just out of reach. Walking down the hallway, faint voices slipped under the doorframe from the living room. My name surfaced like an unwanted echo. Marla's voice, steady but sharp, cut through the hushed tones. He's been forgetting things lately. Simple things. It's sad, really, but we can't let him handle too much anymore. The words stopped me cold. Confused? Forgetful? My hands clenched without me even noticing. Each syllable wasn't just a comment. It was an attack on my mind, my dignity, a deliberate lie crafted to make me small in the very house I had built. I leaned closer, heart pounding. Another relative whispered, "She's probably right. Did you see him last night? Just sitting alone." The sting was worse than any winter wind. Betrayal had found its language, and it wore Marla's smile. By breakfast, the whispers had grown legs. Randy Ketchum sat at the table, biting into a biscuit like he owned the place. With a smirk, he said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Hey Lester, did you finally find your keys this morning? Or did you misplace them again?" A few chuckles rolled around the table. Others didn't laugh, but they didn't look at me either. Eyes shifted away, as though staring at me might confirm Marla's story. The warmth drained from the room. My chair, once the head of the table, felt like a stranger's seat. Words formed in my throat, but I swallowed them back. To defend myself now would only make me look guilty. Exactly what they wanted. I chewed in silence, each bite tasting like sawdust, as if I'd been reduced to the shadow of a man in his own kitchen. Marla bustled around the table, arranging napkins as though she were the true mistress of the house. "Dad should just rest and let us younger folks handle things," she said brightly, her tone sugary but lined with steel. And then I saw him, Daryl, my son, standing by the window, arms crossed, eyes lowered. When Marla spoke those words, he nodded, just enough for everyone to notice. It was a small gesture, but it landed like a hammer to my chest. My son's silence had already wounded me days earlier. His nod now sealed the betrayal. Not only had he abandoned me, he had chosen her side. The room spun. A dozen Christmas lights blurred into one burning haze. This wasn't just humiliation, it was exile, engineered by the very people who should have stood beside me. I slipped away before the meal ended, walking the hallway that felt more like a gauntlet of stairs. In the quiet of my den, I reached into the drawer where the papers lay, the printed emails, the forged drafts, the proof of everything they were plotting. My fingers lingered on the edges. The weight of those documents was heavier than any insult. These weren't whispers or rumors, they were weapons, and I held them. For a moment, the urge to storm back into that dining room boiled inside me, but wisdom pressed down harder. If I showed my hand now, they'd twist it, turn the family further against me. Timing was everything. I folded the papers back into the folder, sliding it into its hiding place. As I left the den, the faint sound of laughter drifted down the hall, not the laughter of joy, but of victory, premature and cruel. Their lies trailed me like shadows, but shadows vanish when the light rises. They thought their lies could bury me, I whispered into the dark, but lies only rot when the truth is ready to rise. Christmas Eve came heavy with tension. The house that once felt like the center of our family now buzzed with voices that did not belong to me. Marla's relatives, 25 strong, crowded the dining room. The smell of roasted ham and pies drifted through the air, but it carried no comfort. The table, long enough to stretch almost wall to wall, had been arranged so that I sat near the end, far from the head where a father usually belonged. Conversations bounced back and forth, weaving past me like I was part of the furniture. Each time I tried to catch a thread, eyes shifted away. My own son sat closer to Marla, his shoulders drawn tight. Saying little but never once looking in my direction, Randy Ketchum leaned back in his chair, smirking as he lifted his glass. "Lucky old man," he said loud enough for the table to hear. "Still living here rent-free, eh?" Laughter rippled around me. I felt the sting in my chest, but I stayed still, hands folded in my lap. Let them laugh. Let them think I was beaten down. The plates clattered as Marla directed the serving, her voice sharp and efficient. Every detail, from who carved the meat to where the breadbasket sat, was hers to control. She had made the table her kingdom, and in her kingdom I was the ghost. But ghosts can speak. I cleared my throat. Enough. The chatter dimmed. Faces turned. My voice carried across the table with a steadiness I hadn't felt in years. From my coat pocket, I pulled folded sheets of paper and set them squarely on the tablecloth. "I found these," I said, my gaze fixed on Marla. Gasps came as the words Eileen Carmack and potential buyers stared back at them from the printed emails. I didn't need to explain. Anyone who could read knew these weren't recipes or shopping lists. Marla's eyes flickered, but she recovered fast. "He doesn't know what he's talking about. Dad's confused. He found some junk in the computer and made up a story." "Confused?" I asked, leaning forward. "I know what I built. I know what I own. Don't tell me I can't read the proof with my own eyes." Murmurs spread around the table. Some relatives glanced at Marla, others at me. For the first time all evening, doubt cracked the mask she wore. Daryl sat frozen, eyes lowered, saying nothing. His silence was sharper than Randy's laugh, sharper than Marla's lies. As the voices swelled again, a soft touch brushed against my hand. I looked down to see Shanda, my granddaughter, sliding a folded note under my palm. She didn't look at me, just kept her face neutral, eyes fixed on her plate. I slipped the paper into my lap and opened it. 4 words, written in her quick, neat script. "I know the truth." A rush of heat filled my chest, not from anger but from something else, hope. She had seen enough. She was on my side. I folded the letter, careful not to betray her, and tucked it away, for her safety. Her secret would remain between us. Marla slammed her hand on the table. "This is madness." Some heads nodded, eager to follow her lead, but others didn't. Uneasy glances darted between the papers, the furious woman, and the silent son at her side. The crack in their certainty widened. I straightened, letting my voice cut through the noise once more. Truth doesn't vanish just because you call it a lie. The room split open, some shouting in Marla's defense, others whispering that maybe, just maybe, I was right. The table groaned under the weight of food untouched, but no one cared for dinner anymore. The air was thick with fury, doubt, and the beginnings of war. The table that was supposed to unite us had become a battlefield, and I wasn't leaving it in defeat. The silence after my words was heavier than any snowfall I'd ever known. For a long breath, no one dared to move. The evidence I had laid on the table glared back at them in stark black and white. and Shanda's quiet support lingered like a faint ember in the dark. Then, like ice cracking on a frozen lake, the room broke apart into jagged noise. Randy Ketchum's voice cut first. "You've lost it, old man. Next thing you'll tell us is the government's after you." Laughter bubbled up from a corner of the table, but it was nervous, not sure of itself. Across the room, a few relatives traded uneasy looks. Whispers traveled like sparks on dry hay. Some shook their heads at Marla, not at me. Marla tried to laugh too, but the sound came brittle, like glass about to shatter. "He's confused. Don't encourage this nonsense." She reached for Daryl's hand, but my son pulled it back to his lap, his face pale, his eyes staring somewhere far away. His silence hit me harder than Randy's mockery. The noise grew. A cousin argued with another about respect, voices rising, words spilling over each other. Half the table leaned toward Marla, clinging to her version. The other half shifted back, doubtful now that the mask had slipped. I sat straighter, letting the storm rage. Every lie needed noise to breathe, and there was plenty of noise. But in the middle of it, a few truths began to surface. Shanda's eyes found mine. She didn't speak, but the small nod she gave was enough. It reminded me that not all bridges were burned. Marla slammed her fist on the table, silverware jumping. "You're ruining Christmas!" Her voice cracked, the fury inside spilling into every corner of the room. A hush followed, not of agreement but of discomfort. Even her allies shifted in their chairs, embarrassed by the venom that slipped through. The more she raged, the smaller her circle became. I spoke softly, so they had to lean in to hear. The truth is simple. It doesn't need shouting. Lies do. That line landed heavier than I expected. A couple of chairs scraped back. Some of the younger relatives left the table altogether, muttering about not wanting to be part of this. Marla called after them, but her voice had lost its edge, sounding desperate instead of commanding. The division was written across their faces now, some glaring at me, others avoiding Marla's eyes, all of them knowing the night could never be patched back with polite words. I looked at Daryl one last time. He kept his gaze lowered, lips pressed thin, still saying nothing. That silence condemned him more than any words could. When the door finally slammed behind the last of Marla's closest relatives, the house felt both emptier and heavier. A battle had been fought, but not finished. Their absence was only the start of something larger. And as I sat at that broken table, evidence tucked safe within reach, one thought stayed with me. The real reckoning had only just begun. The morning light filtered weakly through the blinds, casting long, tired shadows across the living room. The house was unusually quiet, the kind of silence that settles after a storm has torn through and left only wreckage behind. I sat in my chair, the weight of the night before still pressing on my chest. Marla's shrill voice, Randy's mocking laughter, the shocked faces when the truth first cracked the surface. It all replayed in jagged fragments. Some relatives had slipped out in shame before dawn. The ones who remained moved about stiffly, avoiding eye contact, their voices hushed. Christmas morning felt hollow, stripped of warmth. The coffee pot hissed in the kitchen, and the smell of stale grounds did little to soften the air. A few cousins gathered around the table, but the usual chatter was gone. Instead, I heard whispers carried like smoke, doubts about Marla, questions about what had really been happening behind closed doors. I didn't speak. And I didn't have to. The lies had begun to unravel on their own. By mid-morning, the cracks widened. Marla swept into the living room with her usual bravado, announcing plans for brunch, insisting everything would proceed as if nothing had happened. But her voice wavered when no one responded. A couple of her relatives exchanged glances, then excused themselves to pack their bags. Others lingered, but their silence was heavier than any words. Marla tried again, louder this time, ordering furniture to be moved back and barking at Daryl to help. He didn't budge. The authority she had flaunted for years was slipping like sand through her fingers. Her words, once sharp enough to cut, now fell dull and lifeless. I watched her flounder, her face flushed with desperation. For the first time, she seemed to understand that control built on manipulation has no foundation. Then came the email. It appeared on my phone through a family thread I rarely used. A nephew had forwarded it after stumbling across the trail I had left open the night before. The subject line glared at me. Unauthorized listing. Immediate concern. Eileen Carmack, the realtor, had written directly to Marla, warning her that she could not legally proceed with showing or listing a property she didn't own. My name was clearly attached, absent from any authorization. The blood in my veins surged hot, not from anger now, but from vindication. This wasn't just family betrayal, it was fraud, and Marla knew it. Her hands trembled as she snatched the phone from Daryl, scrolling frantically. "This isn't what it looks like," she hissed, her eyes darting around the room, but the evidence was there, undeniable. Relatives began to murmur louder, the tide turning fully against her. One aunt shook her head in disgust. A cousin whispered, "She really thought she could get away with it?" The air thickened with judgment, every pair of eyes narrowing in her direction. Marla's face hardened, panic flashing beneath the anger. She had been unmasked, and there was no curtain to hide behind. Through it all, Daryl sat slumped in his chair, staring at the floor. I looked at him, waiting, hoping against the sinking weight in my chest. This was his chance to stand, to speak truth, to reclaim the bond between us. But he said nothing. His silence spread across the room like a verdict. Relatives took note. His refusal to defend her was confirmation enough. In that stillness, I heard the final crack of something breaking that no glue could repair. Marla lashed out one last time, voice shrill and breaking. "You're all fools." But the words fell flat. No one believed her anymore. The mask she had worn, charming, in control, indispensable, was gone. What remained was raw fury, stripped bare for everyone to see. I stood then, not to shout, not to argue, but to steady the air. "The truth doesn't need noise," I said quietly. "It stands on its own." The room hushed, eyes shifting from me to Marla. For a heartbeat, I saw her falter, her chest rising and falling like someone cornered. Then she spun on her heel, her footsteps sharp against the hardwood as she stormed down the hall. The slam of the front door rattled the windows, leaving behind a silence louder than her rage. Daryl didn't follow her. He sat frozen, shoulders hunched, eyes empty. My heart twisted, not in anger now, but in a deep ache that reached further than any betrayal. His silence was the loudest confession of all. I remained standing, feeling the weight of the house settle differently around me. The balance had shifted. Marla's fight wasn't over. I could see it in the way she had left, her threats lingering in the air. But neither was mine. The battle lines were drawn, and the next move would not be in whispers but in consequences. The morning light fell pale across the kitchen floor, colder than it should have been on Christmas. A hush lingered in the house, as if the walls themselves carried the shame of last night's chaos. Marla hadn't shown her face since she stormed off, and Daryl sat at the table staring into a cup of coffee gone cold. Around us, a few relatives shuffled quietly, avoiding my eyes, their cheer gone, their loyalty uncertain. I watched it all in silence, every humiliation replayed in my head, the invitation that treated me like a guest, the way they moved my belongings as if I didn't matter, the laughter at my expense, my son's silence, my daughter-in-law's arrogance, all of it pressed into my chest until I could feel it burning in my ribs. This house had seen better mornings, and so had I. But today, I wasn't going to carry their weight quietly. By late morning, I stood, cane in hand, and asked them to gather in the living room. There was no force in my voice, but there was no room for refusal either. One by one they came, settling on couches and chairs, some standing in the doorway. The air was tight, heavy with waiting. Marla slipped in last, her chin high, eyes darting, daring me to speak. I steadied myself, leaning on the cane, the fire inside keeping my legs firm. "This house," I said slowly, "has seen more loyalty than I've received from my own blood." The words cut through the silence. A few looked at the floor. Others shifted uncomfortably. I took a breath and went on, each word heavier than the last. I have given everything I had to this family, my time, my work, my heart, and in return, I've been treated like a burden, mocked in my own kitchen, erased from my own walls. But that ends today. Gasps filled the room when I pulled a folded paper from my pocket. I held it up so every eye could see. "This is an email," I said, my voice steady as steel, "between my daughter-in-law and a realtor named Eileen Carmack. It talks about buyers. Buyers for this house. My house." Marla jumped to her feet, voice shrill. "That's a lie. He doesn't know what he's reading. He's confused. He's too old to—" I cut her off. "Confused? Old. You can spin whatever story you want, Marla, but this paper doesn't lie." All eyes swung to Daryl, and I turned toward him too. "And you," I said, quieter but sharper. "Your silence was the loudest betrayal." He flinched, shoulders hunched, lips trembling but closed. The silence he gave me again felt like a blade sliding between ribs. Around us, the relatives erupted, some shouting that they had known something was wrong, others demanding Marla explain herself. Randy muttered something about finally seeing the truth and slunk toward the door. Marla's face twisted with rage. "He's manipulating all of you." Shanda, my granddaughter, stepped closer from the corner, her small voice carrying across the room. "Grandpa isn't senile. He's telling the truth. I've seen things too." Marla spun on her, but the girl didn't flinch. That courage put iron in my spine. Daryl finally spoke, voice hoarse. "I didn't know how to stop her," he said, eyes locked on the floor. "I thought if I stayed quiet, it would blow over." The words hit harder than any shout could. Weakness dressed up as an excuse. My own son had chosen cowardice over loyalty. The room fractured. A few stormed out, muttering about lies and betrayal. Others stayed, their faces torn between pity for me and disgust for Marla. And me, I stood straighter, cane planted firm, my chest rising with the fury and sorrow of it all. I looked at Marla, her mask shattered, her eyes wild. "If you want my house," I said, my voice carrying to every corner of that room, "you'll have to bury me with it, because I'm not leaving quietly." The silence that followed was deeper than anything that came before, heavy, final. The living room had never felt so empty, not empty in a sad way, but in the way a storm leaves behind clear skies and a sharp chill. The echoes of shouting and slammed doors were gone, replaced by a quiet so pure it almost hummed. I stood in the middle of the room with the printed emails still in my hand, the pages creased from the way I'd clutched them through the worst of it. My heart slowed. The decision was made. This house wasn't slipping from my grasp, not while I still had breath in me. On the coffee table sat my travel folder, a ticket to Las Vegas, booked weeks earlier as an escape, now looked different. It wasn't a retreat anymore, it was a choice. For the first time in days, I let myself breathe deep, the air carrying more resolve than despair. The next step was simple: protect what was mine with proof, not anger. I dialed Eileen Carmack's number, putting her on speaker so Shanda could listen. Her young eyes carried a mixture of concern and fire. She deserved to hear the truth firsthand. "Mr. Vaughn," Eileen said quickly when she picked up, "I need to clarify. There is no signed listing. Your daughter-in-law only inquired, but nothing official was filed." Her voice tightened, apologetic. She promised to send an email confirming all activity was withdrawn, attaching every correspondence for my records. The weight in my chest lightened, though it didn't vanish. After ending that call, I placed another to my attorney. He listened, calm and methodical, then gave me exactly what I needed: a notice of trespass to remove unwanted relatives, a cease and desist draft, and a time slot the next business day to finalize a revocable trust. His voice was crisp, confident, reminding me that boundaries weren't just feelings. They could be written into law. For the first time in a long while, I felt armed. By noon, the locksmith arrived, a sturdy man in a navy jacket. He replaced the deadbolts as I stood watching, hands clasped behind my back. Each turn of the screwdriver was like sealing cracks in the walls of my life. When he finished, I pressed the new keys into my palm, cold and solid. The doorbell rang before I could pocket them. A sheriff's deputy stood on the porch, hat in hand. He explained calmly that he was there for a wellness check, but also to serve notice. I stepped aside as he delivered the message to the handful of lingering relatives, including Randy, who sneered until the deputy repeated the words. The homeowner rescinds permission. You must leave. Marla's voice rose sharp, bitter. This isn't yours to... I cut her off with one sentence, steady as stone. You are no longer welcome here. The door shut behind them with a finality that felt like a gavel strike. For once, there was no shouting match, no need for another word. That was the victory. Clean, undeniable. Later, Daryl found me on the porch, his shoulders slumped, hands stuffed into his coat pockets. He couldn't look me in the eye at first. I didn't know how to stop her, he whispered. I let the silence hang heavy before speaking. You didn't try. His face reddened. For a moment, he looked like the boy who once begged me to fix his broken bike, ashamed of the chain he'd let rust. This is how it stands, I said, leaning on my cane. If you want a place in my life, there are conditions. An apology, in writing, complete honesty about money, counseling, and Marla. She has no say in my affairs ever again. You want to rebuild? That's the price. He nodded faintly, still unable to meet my gaze. I felt the ache of love and disappointment collide in my chest, but the line was drawn. Whether he crossed it or not was no longer on me. The Monday after Christmas, I sat in my lawyer's office, pen scratching across documents that locked my home and accounts into a trust. Shanda, beside me, signed as successor trustee with a steady hand. Her youth became my safety net. By New Year's, the realtor had sent her formal apology. My files were sealed, and the house felt lighter. We boxed up Marla's gaudy decorations, taping them shut with no intention of reopening. Shanda cut a simple paper snowflake and pinned it above the mantel. That fragile, homemade piece carried more meaning than all of Marla's glittering ornaments combined. When I checked the folder with my Vegas ticket, it no longer symbolized escape. It meant freedom, the right to decide where I spent my time and who I spent it with. Before leaving, I wrote a note and placed it on the kitchen table. Not for Marla, not for Daryl, not even for Shanda, for myself, and maybe someday. For anyone in this family who cared enough to learn. Boundaries are love with a spine. Silence is not weakness, and home is for those who protect it. I folded it neatly, left it in plain view. Then I picked up my suitcase, stepped into the cold morning, and locked the door behind me. The key clicked with a sound that belonged entirely to me. As the sun rose, washing the frosted lawn in gold, I smiled faintly. I hadn't run from Christmas. I had rescued it,